And good morning, folks. I'm Rick Singleton, the Provost of Queen's College, and delighted to welcome you to another of our continuing education for clergy sessions, which actually these days go beyond only clergy, and that's wonderful, as Queen's College initiatives in education are reaching beyond just training for clergy and continuing ed for clergy. This morning's session is on spirituality for seniors. Sister Elizabeth Davis is our guest presenter. I'm not going to go into a long detail of her complete resume and what have you. As you said, my own experience with Sister Elizabeth reflects what I'm in the course of Dr. Morley Hodder is with us, and he and colleagues in the studies of philosophy and what have you. A lot to deal with. It had young gaffers like me from the Mary's Day who trying to figure out the easiest and fastest way to move for the course, but get out of there, and you would have conscientious students, which is Elizabeth.
From Placentia.
From Placentia Bay, yes, yeah.
Scholars.
They call them proof of their naivety. But wonderful to have you, Sister. Sister Elizabeth, of course, is the congregation leader of the Sisters of Mercy. She has a great history and a well-known history of healthcare and education in the Church, Roman Catholic tradition, and beyond Roman Catholicism, other denominations, and beyond. Well, Sister is, of course, in a variety of honors and including honorary doctorate degrees and Order of Canada, Order of Newfoundland, and what have you. During the fall, she and I worked on a project where we traveled throughout a good bit of the Avalon Peninsula doing facilitating feedback sessions on a project we were working on, and with one other person with us. Both of them had the Order of Newfoundland, Order of Canada. Only order I had in a chest is to get a mug up when I came back to St. John's. But I think they were jealous of it. Anyway, without further ado, Sister, I'll pass it to you. It was great to have you with us. Thank you for agreeing to attend and participate today, and for all that you do for Queen's College and for all of us in the broader community of our province and nation.
Thank you very much.
Someone is giving us interference before Sister starts, and I'm not sure where it's coming from. I'm sure it's an obstruction. It's not that there's anything wrong, as we're trying to deal with the other sounds that are putting in us. Okay, I see a lot of people have their things on. I'm turning off some. Sounds like we probably have it under control there now. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. So pass it back to you. And I'm going to go and get you a mouse.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. It's a joy for me to be here. I have said in many venues that Queen's College is a gift to our province, and therefore I'm always privileged when I have the chance to come here. I'm very conscious in the theme I'm speaking about that almost all of us listening to this are old people. By Canadian standards, if you're 65, you're old. If you're African, if you're 50, you're old. So all of us are old. And therefore, if we're working in the context of being ministers in our churches, what does that mean? What does it mean for me as a minister, and what does it mean for the people among whom I minister? So what I want to do this morning is really three things. I'll just have some opening comments. But then I want to talk about the phenomenon of the time we live in. It is unique in human history. And I really want to speak strongly to that. Then I want to speak to two blights on our society that are rarely mentioned: ageism and elder abuse. And then I hope you and I together will talk about what does a pastoral response mean in that context. You know a lot more about the pastoral response than I do. And so, but we'll encourage conversation about that. So does that sound a good way to spend an hour and a half this morning? So we all have images. Probably the most famous one is from Shakespeare about the cycles of life. He says, all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one in time plays many parts, the acts being 7 stages. And he names the 7. The last scene of all, that ends this strange, eventful history. Its second childishness and mere oblivion, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. So a rather pessimistic last stage. And if you remember his way of saying it, helpless infant, it was unfair to everybody, helpless infant, whining schoolchild, emotional lover, devoted soldier, wise judge, old age, incapacity. And I found this interesting sculpture that you see here of those stages of life. So that's kind of the pattern that's ingrained in our society. We'll talk a little bit about that as we move through. But this is my better objective statement. To me, old age is always 15 years older than I am. I was telling Rick that recently I walked to our cemetery. Our sisters are all buried together in the cemetery, just reflecting on the past of our congregation. And I began to notice the sisters who were really, really old when I entered the convent died when they were 80, 81, 82. Now that seems to me awfully young for them to have died. And I quite constantly find myself saying, I'll say, can you pray for sister? She's ill. And they will say, is she elderly, sister? I'll say, no, she's only 75. She's one of our younger sisters. So old age is 15 years older than I am. And I suspect you have many stories that can echo that same reality. This quotation, I think, is an important one for us to realize. In the 20th century, old age was but a footnote. In the 21st century, it is to become the main theme. The reality of our time is that we have an experience that no other humans has ever had before. You and I are living in a time when 6 generations of people are alive at the same time. That's never before happened in history. And it still only happens in countries like Canada or the United States or England or Australia or New Zealand, what we used to call the developed world, developed being a misnomer. But in most countries still they would not have 6 generations. We have the oldest generation born before the First World War. Very, very few, obviously, from that generation left. The generation then born before the Second World War, many of them left, and many of us in this room probably come from that group. Then there's a baby boom generation, my generation, born between 46 and 61. Then is the famous Generation X, then born up till 81. Then the millennials or Generation Y, born up to between 81 and 2001. Then the generation who are teenagers today, and finally the generation being born today. Now what's interesting about this phenomenon is that we've always had those last 4 generations. But it's been very rare for us to have people over 65, a lot of people over 65. The Presentation Sisters have 5 sisters over 100. And 3 of those sisters are more competent than Rick.
It's a lot to accomplish.
Their minds are clear. I was at a funeral, a wake at their mother house recently, and one of those 105-year-olds said to me, Elizabeth, you know the worst thing about getting old? Like, you're no good anymore. You're no good to anybody. I said, sister, I'm not sure that's true. You and I are having this wonderful conversation. It's so good to be with you. Yes, she said, that's all very well and good, but it really doesn't mean very much. And she lives right at Cathedral Square by the Basilica. So I said to her, sister, just look at the gathering place, because you could see it out the window from where we were chatting. Yes, she said, that's a wonderful work. Thank God we're doing that together. And I said, do you know why we're able to do that together? She said, yes, our 2 congregations are providing the money for it. And I said, where's your congregation getting the money for it? I don't know. She said, I suppose from our investments. And I said, where did the money go to get into those investments? From my pension and my teaching years. So I said, you'll probably do more work now with that money to keep the gathering place going than you did when you were in the classroom when you were 25. She said, I never thought about that before. And I said, you can't die because they're going to lose your pension when you're gone. But how we see our worth, it changes across those generations. Those 6 generations then, the 2 oldest ones being the phenomenon, not the youngest ones, the 2 oldest ones being the phenomenon, all 6 generations are formed with different values. And that is very challenging when you know your generation has the best values. What we're beginning to realize is part of the diversity of our time is that multiple value bases that we have. And guess who figured it out first? The private sector, not the public sector. The private sector figured out if we're going to sell things, we have to know what these people value. So they have done the best science on the difference between a 102-year-old's values and a 95-year-old's values and a 65-year-old's values. And they use that science to sell their products. We should be the first ones to have figured it out, are very slow into coming into an understanding of it. I use the word, the image of the telephone. When I was a child growing up in Fox Harbor, there were 2 telephones in the harbor, one on our side and one on the other side. It only rang if there was something really wrong. Someone was really sick or had died, so you didn't want it to ring. When I was a teenager, we got our own phone in the house, and we were on a party line. There were 6 phones, and our rings was too long, so when too long rang, we answered. I happened to be dating a boy at the time who was also on our party line. When the 2 of us each other, the other 4 receivers were up listening to us. After I left home, we got our own phone number, no party line. And then to save my parents' marriage, they got 2 phones, one upstairs and one downstairs. Then we all got our own phone, personal phone. Then we got cell phones. And now I use a cell phone as a phone. My nieces and nephews don't use it as a phone. I can phone them, they don't answer. So I said to my sister, why aren't they answering the phone? She said, Elizabeth, text them. So I text them, and in a microsecond, they're back to me. They won't answer. They don't know it's a phone. They think it's a camera, a calculator, a clock, a video machine, and a writing machine. They don't realize you can also speak on it. See how it's shifted over time? Now, I'm a dinosaur. So when I text, as my brother said to his wife, that has to be Liz texting, perfect sentences, perfect grammar, perfect spelling, perfect punctuation in a text. I said, she doesn't get it. And when I get a text from my nieces, I had to read it out loud to figure out what it's saying. Because they use letters for words, We use little images for emotions. I actually have to read it out loud the way I learned to read as a little child when I'm reading the text. All that's happening in our lifetime. That's the world we're in. Now, whether we like it or not is totally irrelevant. That is the world we're in. So now what does that mean in terms of older people? Well, by the year 2020, now 2020 is not 25 years' time. 2020 is 3 years' time, less than 3 years' time. We believe, we know now, factually, there will be 1 billion people over the age of 60 in the world. By 2050, more than 20% of the population of the world will be over the age of 60. Now that has never, we couldn't have imagined that even 50 years ago. And by 2050, for the very first time in human history, we will have more people over 50 than under 15. And in those numbers, women outlive men, we just happen to be stronger. And by the age of 80, there are twice as many women as men in the world. Now, these are startling numbers, but they're so global, we need to look at what they mean in our reality, So let's look at that. The life expectancy today in Canada overall is 82 years. So baby born today at the Health Sciences can expect to live to be 82 years. If the baby is a girl, she can expect to live to be 84, a boy to be 80. That's one of the highest life expectancies on this earth. The highest is Japan. But we're all, as you can see in that clustering there, the countries that have a longer history of development and all kinds of realities related to that, all are clustering around the same life expectancy. But what's interesting, that's edging up. But notice what's happening. We're living longer, but not healthier. So more people say to me, sister, how come so many people have dementia today? Because I said there's so many older people today. It's purely a factor of the numbers. It's not dementia is more common. It's more common because people are more common. There are more people to catch dementia or cancer or heart disease. So you know, as we get older, we're more prone to some of those illnesses. And although we've improved our nutrition and our safety to such a degree we're living longer, we haven't found out to keep us living healthier. And that's the challenge we're facing, one of the challenges we're facing in the world today. So we're living in a country then that has a very healthy life expectancy, not the best in the world, interestingly, but very healthy. One of the reasons it's not the best in the world is because one group of us are totally disadvantaged compared to the others, and that group are Aboriginal peoples. Our Indigenous people have a very much lower life expectancy, a much poorer health status, and they bring our numbers down a bit. That's the reality. Otherwise, I suspect we'd be at 64 as well. So that's a blight on our country that we haven't found a way to deal with that. Look at the age pyramid. When I was born in 1958, it was truly a pyramid. Very few people at the top. Very, very many people at the bottom. Look where that same age pyramid is in 2011. Now we have fewer and fewer people at the bottom, not still too many at the top, but that big bulge of the baby boomers is moving up that pyramid. Newfoundland, when we entered Confederation in 1948, we had the highest fertility rate in Canada. Today, Newfoundland's fertility rate is 1.7, so it's the lowest in Canada, and it's less than our death rate, which was why we're going to have continued population challenges. This is more frightening in some ways or more interesting in other ways. In the year 2000, 11.6% of us were over the age of 65. In 10 years, that percentage will double. 22% of us will be over 65. And by 2026, 27% of us will be over 65. Now, the generations that went before us would have no concept that that could possibly happen, that all over, in less than 10 years, a quarter of our population will be over 65. Unfortunately, that's very young, 65. That's something we have no idea how to deal with. We do not have a city whose policies and practices deal with that. We don't have an education system that deals with that. We don't have a taxation system that deals with it, because they were all created when this was beyond believing it could possibly happen. And we don't have a family structure anymore that deals with that. In our census taken in 2005, for the first time in our history in Canada, we have more families without children than with children. Could we have ever imagined that when we were children? We peaked in the number of children in this province in the mid-1970s. And ever since then, the actual number of children, not just proportion, the number of children has significantly diminished. So we, not only in Newfoundland, but across Canada, we now have more families without children than with children. Again, that's not good or bad. The fact is, it's different from the society we've created and from the society we imagine exists. And we don't take much time and thought to ask, what does this mean for all our systems? Now, I would also tell you, you can't see the bottom map so well, but we will have the highest percentage of people over the age of 65. If there's any province that has more responsibility for dealing with us, it would be ours. Many are close to us. You'll notice the Northern Territories, the Nunavut, Yukon, and Northern Territories are very low because they're still on a pattern of less developed country, more Aboriginal people. Now look at the Canadian, because ours would be no different than this. But if you look at the year 2000, which is the top one, just notice what's happening. The pyramid is gradually squaring itself. Now, ours is not like that because the bottom is narrower, ironically. But gradually that pyramid is moving to become a rectangle. And if we could look at 2070, the rectangle would all actually exist. Now, this is not good or bad. That's not the point of this. The point of this is it's different. It's different from the kind of world we've created, and it's different from the kind of church we created. Our church assumes that you die at middle age. Our church assumes there are tons and tons of young people. So whatever the church is, it doesn't matter, whatever the faith tradition is. So I want just to break from that for 1 second, those numbers, to point out some things that are implications of this negatively before we come back to the positive. Among this group of people who are growing in number, who are the people who are at risk? Anyone over 85 is at higher risk of illness, higher risk of isolation, higher risk of losing their independence. An older person living alone without a caregiver of some sort is at risk. That would be unheard of in the Newfoundland in which I was a child. The extended family was so strong. There were so many members of every family who stayed at home. To have an old person living alone, that would be beyond imagination. You couldn't even imagine that would ever happen. Every one of us here this morning, we can name individuals who live alone and are over the age of 80 or 85. Any person who's a member of a minority group, and minority depends on where you are, who the minority is. Just as younger people who are members of minority group, by the way, are at risk. older people with physical or mental impairments. And as I said, as you get older, the risk of these gets higher. Low-income older persons. My heart breaks when I go to the gathering place and see the number of older people coming to the gathering place now and saying to me, "Sister, I have to make a choice. Do I keep on my electricity or do I eat food?" And thank God for 5 days a week I can come here and get a meal. And then I'm able to leave my heat on in the night. Can you imagine these cold nights? No heat. Having to make a choice, that choice. People who are abused, neglected, or exploited, and I'll come back to that because this is a very serious issue. Women are at more risk than men simply because there's more women than men who survive beyond the age, but also the present generation of women have not all been in the workforce and don't have good pensions that many men have. So looking at it objectively, there are more women who are living on old age security and maybe getting a supplement than there would be men at this point in time. That will gradually begin to change because so many women went into the workforce in the 70s and 80s, but that's going to take another couple of decades. So what are the risks? There are basically four. First is discrimination, and I highlight that here because ageism is a phenomenon that's sadly going along with this change. I'll come back to that. The second is poverty. One of the things I've learned because of my work at the gathering place is that what I call the intersections of vulnerabilities. I used to talk about poverty and that social justice and poverty. I know poverty never stands alone. Now I know that. Poverty is highly correlated with mental illness, with physical illness, with homelessness, with addictions, with incarceration. So if you add to that older age, then you have a real complex intersection of vulnerability. The third challenge of our time is violence and abuse of older people, and I want to come back to that. And then the point I made earlier, we do not have a health system prepared for this, no more than we have an employment system or a pension system. None of our systems ever, I don't know why, predicted this phenomenon. And I feel saddest about the health system because I was so associated with it for so long. The amount of ageism in our acute care hospitals is absolutely appalling. And anyway. To add to that, the United Nations, who has so many conventions on the rights of indigenous people, the rights of women, the rights of the child, has no convention on the right of the older person. Again, it's like it came upon us unaware that we had all these older people. And for the majority of the countries on earth, they still don't have older people. So you can understand, I suppose. But the United Nations has not got a convention on the rights of the older person. And Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General, has said that we have to rectify that. They're beginning, but they still have not developed the convention on it. So what do we mean by ageism? Ageism, simply put, is a deep and profound prejudice against the elderly, which is found to some degree in all of us. It allows younger generations to see older people as different from themselves. Therefore, they subtly cease to identify with older people as human beings. So that translates into attitudes, prejudicial attitudes. It translates into discriminatory practices against individuals, and it translates into institutional practices overall. I found this would be an interesting way to express it. First of all, you don't hear much talk about ageism, easily ignored, but there's a book called Elderhood Rising. William Thomas says, our society openly, albeit heatedly, discusses racism, classism, sexism, and homophobia, all rightly so. It seems so strange to me that we're so conspicuously silent on the question of age-based discrimination. If you go around making jokes based on another person's gender, that's called sexism. If you make jokes about another person's race, that's called racism. But if you joke about somebody's age, that's called situation comedy. We do not take seriously the extent of ageism in our society. So what do we do about this? Well, somehow it is connected to how we improve the health of people as they age, given so many are aging. That sounds funny when you put it that way, like the very fact you're alive, isn't that enough? But that's not so. Increasing age is not helpful unless we increase health with it. Having different kinds of systemic ways of addressing poverty, pensions, and so on. How do we image in the arts? How do we image old people? How do we create physical cities or towns that are age-friendly? Nutrition for older people. If you're an older person living alone, one of the first things that falls off the face of the earth is proper nutrition. And how do we use all the advances we're making in technology and design, architectural design, to make places more age-friendly? So how do we identify the myths and the misinformation? How do we get past that ageism in imaging, whether it's on television or in the print media or in the jokes we tell each other, or how we see ourselves in terms of ageism? How do we get past stereotypes? I speak frequently, as you know, around now, even not only around the country, but outside. And sometimes I speak to younger audiences. And the first thing I say to them is, I am an old woman. And I am willing to bet my pension there is not one of you in this audience who could keep up to me in terms of the work that I do, the travel that I do. And they're shocked, that I would say it outright. Shouldn't I deny I'm old? When I started to turn gray and my youngest brother would tease me about it, I would say, no, Bill, I got my hair dyed so I'd look sophisticated. So I was denying the aging then, but I don't deny it anymore. But we have that myth, if you're old, you're useless. I spoke once after one of our ministers in government, and it was on seniors care or something, and he said, like, we owe an amazing debt to the older people who went before us. You know, we should care for them because they were our parents, they were the workers in the society, and so on. So I got up and I said, Minister, thank you for that, but you're wrong, you know. And I said, we don't care for older people for the good they did when they were younger. Even if they were lazy reprobates, they're still people who have dignity and are to be respected for that. With whatever they did is irrelevant. It's not payback. It's what it is to respect another human. We need to learn more about aging because it's a phenomenon, a huge, huge, huge human phenomenon that we have no previous experience of. How can we understand it if we don't study it, learn about it? Listen to people who have experienced discrimination. One of my fears of this moment is around medical assistance in dying. Whatever I think about that ethically is a different issue. But because we own St. Patrick's Mercy Home and I'm on the board there, the staff have been saying to us for so long, Sister, you have no idea how people sometimes treat their parents who live here. And when we began the conversations around medical assistance in dying, they said to me, you know what's going to happen, Sister? Some people are going to ask to receive medical assistance in dying because they know they're a burden on their family. Not because they have pain they can't deal with, or nausea they can't deal with. And that these, I believe, are some legitimate causes. But some people have been told they're a burden, and that's why they want to receive an earlier death. And I thought, if we've come to a society that puts that pressure on a person to take themselves away from life because they're a burden on somebody, what have we done? What have we done? And I use, anytime I'm invited to speak on MAID, I talk about that issue, the bigger context, because that legislation has very important pieces to it that are important for us to look at. But that's a piece that's sliding into oblivion in terms of the conversation. Look at the media. You know, I'm very sensitized to looking at women in the media. Like, I don't get why young men singers can be fully clothed and young women singers have to be half naked if they both have the same talent in music. I don't get that. So I'm very sensitized to that. As I get older, I'm more sensitized now to how women, to elderly women are treated and elderly women are treated worse in the media than elderly men. Elderly men are seen often as statesmen, but elderly women are spinsters or whatever. Watch our own language. Talk openly about these issues, and that's why I commend you, Rick, for even having this kind of a conference for us. Building intergenerational bridges. This is the only way we know any prejudice works. And then support those who fight, address ageism, and push for systemic changes. This city is not an age-friendly city. If you have bad knees, this city is not good for your health. And at the provincial level, we talk about supporting older people, and then we close little libraries in places like Fox Harbour, which was a place older people gathered, saved probably 20 cents in total on the budget. Just never thought it through. Look at this ad for very high-level purses. You know, very sophisticated company, billions of dollars in assets, seen enough old bags, try a new face. Now they would argue it's just a joke. We're just selling our purses. There's no harm in that. But there is a lot of harm in that. And there are a number of other companies who endorse the ad. So it's just an example of, even in the most sophisticated society, that this kind of inappropriate imaging can continue to undermine where we are in the society. Now, one aspect of ageism is elder abuse. Even saying that causes me to shudder. But I learned early in my life in healthcare how much elder abuse there is in our province, where you would think culturally we would have so much respect for our older people. Elder abuse can be physical, mental, financial, or sexual. And it wasn't long ago in the media here, a woman in her mid-80s was sexually assaulted, living alone in her own home. But there's another form of abuse that is equally bad, and that is neglect. So not only is it an action, but it's a lack of action, a lack of support for a person. Who abuses older people? Primarily family members. Just saying that. Primarily family members, friends, spouses, volunteer caregivers, legal guardians, staff in hospitals or long-term care facilities, doctors, lawyers, nurses, and then strangers and con artists. We know with the con artists, older people are more susceptible to abuse using telephone and computer. We all get those telephone calls. Do you realize your credit card is maxed out? Or do you realize just give me your phone number and I'll deal with it. You know, we all get them. And older people are more prone, because they're a generation that didn't grow up with the computer as part of their way of thinking, they're more prone to believe something that comes electronically and therefore fall. This is billions of dollars in this country alone of fraud perpetrated against people electronically, and primarily against older people. One of our sisters phoned me recently and she said, Elizabeth, did you know that Father somebody was in trouble financially in London, England, and needed money desperately, and I sent him some? I said, Sister, tell me you didn't do that. She said, Elizabeth, we need as a congregation to send him a lot more than I could send him. The poor man is over there. Somebody stole his credit card. He hasn't got a cent to get home. And I said, Sister, that was a scam. No, they said his name. It couldn't be a scam. He signed the computer email himself. It couldn't be a scam. You know, so another sister told me she won a cruise and she sent her credit card number, and could another sister go with her? You know, and by the time we canceled the credit card, she had lost up by that time $2,000. So it's this, it's that whole sense of, you know, there are people out there who are going to con you. The cons are particularly bad for older people, but the real abuse of older people is perpetrated by families and in healthcare facilities. The ageism that I have experienced in acute care in this city frightens me, and I've spoken to it. I've spoken strongly to it. And we've challenged now St. Patrick's Mercy Home to be an advocate, not just for the residents in our building there, but for this kind of ageism that happens. And it's not deliberate. That's the sad part about the healthcare, is inadvertent. They don't realize the implications of what they're saying or doing. But for family members, we know that and as I said from my experience at St. Patrick's Mercy Home, the people who take the family members' money, the people who sometimes keep the family member in their home so they can keep taking their pensions, make them virtual prisoners in their home, don't do much to help, but take the money. And then those who actually physically abuse. You know, mom has dementia, she never knows what she's at, so they give her a knock or just a swipe or push her down. You would be horrified if you knew how extensive that was in the society. And what recourse does a woman or a man have if they have a physical injury or a dementia that they're dependent on their family? Are they going to go to the police and say, my son beat me up? Not likely. They find reasons to explain it all the time that would satisfy whoever challenges it. The group in this city that is doing the best work around this is the Seniors Resource Center, not our churches, unfortunately, but the Seniors Resource Center, which is really, I don't know if some of you are probably part of that group, underfunded, but has really taken on this whole activity to counter elder abuse and to give older people the right to challenge elder abuse. So they are an important resource for us in the community here. So where are elders abused? In the community, at home, in hospitals, clinics, offices, care facilities. Ordinary, everyday places that you walk every single day. Sometimes elder abuse is one-off, and sometimes there's a whole pattern of abuse. If it's financial, it's likely to be a pattern. Physical abuse sometimes is just you make a swipe at somebody, knock off, don't tell me that, you told me that 20 times. Mental abuse will often be systemic, continuing. Sometimes it's not intentional. I love Mom, but she gets so much on my nerves. I have to tell her every now and then, stop telling me that over and over and over again. You already told it to me. You know, a person doesn't see what they're doing when they do that. And very often what happens is that person is overwhelmed. The caregiver is overwhelmed, doesn't have proper supports, is at their wit's end, and lashing out is the only way they can deal with it. But let's look at what you and I do. Even the phrase, the elderly. When we say that, we put everybody in that one box. So whether it's me with my very active lifestyle, one of our sisters with dementia, or that 105-year-old sister in presentation, we're all the elderly. And once you name somebody by one quality, then you deal with them by that quality. So don't ever use that phrase, ever. It's a stereotypical phrase. I'll never forget this. I went to our Macaulay Common, is where our older sisters live. And one evening I was visiting, and one of the sisters was crying. No, I'm hopeless in pastoral situations, I have to tell you. So I said, Sister, is something wrong? Can I get the nurse for you? She said, no, Elizabeth. She said, that very lovely nurse. Do you know what she just said to me? I said, no. And this sister is very competent, but very physically disabled. I said, no, what did she say to you? She said, come, dear, let me put you to bed. She said, the last person said that to me was my mom when I was a little girl. Does she know she should say, I'll help you get in bed, not I'll put you to bed? Does she understand how much that hurts me? It's hard enough not to be able to stand up and walk. And it's hard enough not to be able to do stuff for myself. But to tell me she's going to put me to bed, like she was heartbroken. It's haunted me ever since, haunted me. And that was a very loving nurse who really did love that sister, but forgot that she's an independent person, not a little child. The language we use, dearie, Newfoundlanders are desperately bad at this. We have a taxi company that we use when I'm going quite early in the morning to the airport, and he always calls me my love. Yes, my love. I'll get you. We'll get you now. Don't you worry. The fourth one is the hardest one that I have had to deal with in my congregation. That is laughing with friends at the funny things a person with dementia has said. And they are funny very often. But to laugh, then I think, if that were me, that had been well respected for my whole life, and someone is now laughing at something I said because I'm childish. And that I've had to be very strong in my language about not doing that. And we all fall into it. Using baby language when you're speaking to an older person, even if that person has dementia. We've thought hard about this in the health system, endorsing the use of physical and pharmaceutical restraints. And thank God, I think, well, if you had to be 20 years ago at St. Patrick's Nursing Home, many of the residents would have been restrained. Not anymore. That's one battle we have done well. Giving an older person no choice. That's hardest for me. I'm bossy by nature. And now that I'm the leader of the congregation and know everything, it's really hard for me to give a person a choice to make what I think and know is a mistake for them. Really hard for me. Taking away an older person's privacy. You know, we do that in hospitals regularly. I always railed against it. You know, I would say, you live in your own home as a middle-aged woman. Nobody comes into your bedroom without your permission. You come in the hospital, a maintenance man can come in to fix the light. The floor sweeper comes in to sweep the floor. The candy striper comes in to fix the flowers on your bench. The doctor walks in with 7 or 8 students with him. The nurse walks in, takes your temperature, doesn't even tell you what he's going to do. The pastoral care person walks in. Like anybody, steals into your bedroom, doesn't ask permission. We feel because we're doing something good for the person, we have the right to invade their privacy. And finally, focusing on what has gone rather than what remains. I remember visiting one of our sisters. She was 99 at the time, and it was 4 o'clock in the evening, and she was reading the paper. So I said to her, Sister, you're reading the paper? She said, yes, Elizabeth. I always wait till before supper to read it, because, you know, my memory's not as good as it was. And when I go to to our table, I want to have some interesting things for us to talk about. So I remember the interesting things in the paper. So she was a woman who knew, from good Placentia Bay woman, she knew that otherwise we'd all talk about our ailments, what we've lost, as opposed to what is. So these are just simple things to challenge our own ways of behaving, not what somebody else is doing. This is an image, it's a real image. It comes from England. It's an accident of signs, but it says it perfectly. You know, they have elderly person crossings in England, those of you who visited there. This one just happened to be near the sign to the cemetery. But you know, that's the way we think of old, isn't it perfect? That's exactly the way we think of older people, simply hobbling their way to the cemetery. Whereas this is probably a nicer imaging of older people. You know, all their diversity and all their relationships. That middle picture I always put in with the computer. When my mom was 91, she gave her 85-year-old sister a computer for her birthday. Now she said, Anne, you know, the young ones are moving away and they're never going to keep in touch with us. But one thing I learned is if you have a computer, you're able to talk to them and see their face when you're talking to them. So you need a computer because I'm going to be dead soon. I'm the only one you have left. That aunt, who's the only one left from that family, is now 94, has a computer, tells us, because she's on Facebook and I'm not, tells me which one of my nieces is engaged or which one of the nephews is having a baby. If I didn't have her, I wouldn't know what was going on in my own family. So it's how we image people. You know, how we image people. You know, Mr. Trump, I read recently, the greatest damage Mr. Trump has done is he's managed to change our image from immigrant to terrorist. So your first suspicion when you see someone who's different is not they must be from another country. It is now they must be a terrorist from another country. And that's all about imaging. Nobody taught that, nobody explained that, but you say it often enough and you start to believe it. You mightn't even consciously know you believe it, but when the first image that comes, if that's the first image that comes, if that's the first image that comes when you see and think about all elderly people, first of all, it's not you, it's somebody 15 years older than you, but you can see as opposed to this is the imaging that we see. So all of this to say, and I just want to come to one more group to contextualize this piece. In my role as congregation leader, which I came into 7 years ago, one group of people with whom I had no experience was people with dementia. In my own family, people died of heart disease and cancer. I had no personal experience of somebody with dementia. Once I became leader of our congregation, I had an immediate experience with sisters with dementia. And I was totally beside myself in knowing how to deal with it. The first thing I made clear is we weren't laughing at the stories. But that was it. That was the extent of my ability to deal with that. And I've struggled with that. I have struggled with it. Some of the leaders in our congregation prior to me have dementia or had dementia before they died. Some of the smartest women in our congregation had dementia. And I don't know if you know, but there's an amazing longitudinal study on in the United States around dementia being carried out by one of the prestigious universities in the States. And the congregation of the IHMs, it's a very large congregation in the States, they made an agreement with this company, with these researchers, that all their sisters who died donated their brains before they died. So they could do a study on a control group of people who would have had a social reality that was very similar to see how those with dementia and those without dementia, what were the characteristics. It's been an amazing study. There's actually the professor who was an atheist when he started this. I think they pretty much converted him a bit now. He's written the book called, I think it's called Aging with Grace, partway, the study is ongoing. And they found some wonderful things. They found this 93-year-old woman who was in the control group of having no dementia, brilliant university professor. She had advanced dementia, but she was able to cloak it completely. And they found there's no intelligence level correlation. There's no wealth of their birth family correlation. So they're seeing what correlates with getting dementia and what doesn't as part of the study. So what do we know about persons with dementia? First and foremost, they're persons. And what I have learned, there's no one face of dementia that's the same. One sister came to me one morning. She said, Elizabeth, here are my car keys. Here's my license. I want you to tell this place I'm working in ministry that I'm no longer going to be there because the doctor told me yesterday that I'm starting to get Alzheimer's disease. I want to go to our long-term care facility so I can prepare myself to continue to do ministry as this illness progresses. 2 days later, I went to another sister and said, Sister, I hate to talk about this, but I really want you to come now to our Macaulay convent because I see you're starting to have some forgetfulness and I'm afraid you're going to hurt yourself. She said, I can't believe you're doing this. I voted for you to be the leader, and you're treating me like this, like dirt. How dare you? I'm not moving out of here ever, 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 and you can't make me. Even if you make the police come, I'm not going to let them take me. 2 women with dementia, totally different in terms of their response. But what I've learned is that the sister still is a person of infinite value. She has a name, not dearie, not sweetie, not my love, but a name. She has a spirit. She has feelings, a will and a personality. She has a life story. And there are parts of many of our sisters are always looking for their mother and father, or they're trying to get home because there's nobody to stay with their mother or father. It's just quite interesting. So you can have a wonderful conversation about that time in their lives. She lives in a space, her space. She has the one thing I do not have, the present moment. In all my work about contemplation, the one thing I've learned is that you are called to live in the moment. I can't do that. I am incapable of being in the moment. I'm always thinking, what am I going to do about this? How am I going to handle that problem? Even when I'm talking to you, I'm thinking, that's an idea for my next talk. Like, I'm incapable of staying in the present moment. The gift our sisters have who have dementia is that they have only the present moment. And that will change 2 minutes' time. It will change. But for now, they have the one gift I wish I had, that ability to be in the moment. And they teach me something about that. We also know that a person with dementia will give and receive love and affection. We have learned with our sisters, even the sisters who can be most aggressive in their dementia, that if you're gentle with them, they respond to the gentleness. If you're harsh with them, they respond to the harshness. They don't have filters anymore. And they can talk to you about stories. One of our sisters who has dementia, she and I have a common friend who's in Toronto from a different congregation. She remembers her name. She doesn't remember my name. But we talk about her. Another one of our sisters is from Placentia Bay. She's 103. And I would chat with her about the same water in our veins, sister. You're from O'Dearn, aren't you? And she says, yes. Now, where are you from in the Bay? And I'd say, Fox Harbour. Oh, yes, that's a little bit away from O'Dearn. I'll say, yes, but not as far as we are here in St. John's. That's true. And we have little stories with each other about O'Dearn, which I've never been on. But she can tell me about that the same. She's a musician. And when they're singing, sometimes she's moving her hand, either leading the music or playing the piano. Another one of our sisters who died with dementia knew the word of every single song. So Christmas time, she sang every Christmas carol beginning to end. Now, she couldn't even know how to feed herself. She didn't know when you gave her a fork that she was to take food, but she knew the word of every single song. So find what is there, not what is gone. Focus on that. So, and the arts, we found music therapy to be a real gift for our sisters. And how to work with that, and how to recognize that there are stages of dementia, and when you move with the stages, you know how much is left, not how much is gone, but how much still remains, working with that. So what has been the hardest thing, I think, for me in my leadership, it's been extremely important. And that's the point I want to end this section on, is that diversity. Older people are like younger people, incredibly diverse. Some are smart, some are not very smart. Some are very outgoing, some are very withdrawn. They're just like every person, whether it's an infant or a 20-year-old or a 60-year-old, they're just as diverse because they're us. Look at the diversity in this room. Some of us speak with different accents. Some image the church very differently from others. Some would be the life of the party. Some, like me, just a necessary evil at a party. Some are beautiful singers, and some are not so beautiful singers and get even with God by singing really loud in the church. Some have a real feel for pastoral presence. Others have no feel for that. Some are quite analytical. Others are, whatever happens, happens. So we're all different. And we're no less different in our older age than we were in our younger age. As one of our sisters says, you get more like yourself when you get older. So if there's ever one pastoral lesson we have to learn, it's the importance of this diversity. So before I move any further, then, I'm going to let you make comments or tell me, this is not what, she doesn't get it at all. Make comments or ask questions. And people on the line as well.
Yeah, but just keep an eye to, well, if anyone online wants to ask a question, please just unmute yourself and bring it forward. But in this room, there might be a comment or observation that anyone has for Sister, a very interesting context of spirituality for seniors, the whole background. Michelle, yes.
Hi.
I'll ask you to say your name and kind of what you do or where you're from, just as you're bringing your questions forward for the benefit of those who aren't in the room with you.
Thank you so much. My name is Michelle Rebedew. I actually teach here at Queen's College and over at MUN as well. And being the youngest person in
Yes, I was going to say.
No, but this is very, very fascinating. Thank you for the presentation. And also, I'm just wondering, have you, in your own, leadership among your community, have you found any particular, I suppose I could say something like meditation exercises to be particularly effective? Like which exercises more than others to be more effective?
Can you hold that question, Michelle? Because the second part of my presentation is the pastoral response. We'll come back to that because it's a very important question. But I want to put it in that context.
Okay.
Jumping ahead of me.
Thank you. Sorry.
You used a term that I just can't get out of my mind. The intersection of vulnerability. Would you comment a bit further on that?
That's one of the new learning for me, Dr. Hodder, that I didn't have until I got to work at the gathering place. Mm-hmm. And it became, the way my mind works, better than many, that I had to get it straight in my head. And I didn't get it straight until I was making a presentation at one point. And it dawned on me that there's not one person at the gathering place that has only one vulnerability. You know, the poor people there, but they're never just poor. They're either poor and they're homeless, or they're poor and they have addictions.
But they're usually just thought of as poor.
Yeah. Or no, that's one part of it. Or they're maybe thought of as a drug addict.
Yeah.
Or a homeless person.
Exactly, yeah.
They're taught about one point. So there's somebody trying to help them about that one thing. But realizing that's not, there's a whole picture here of intersection of vulnerabilities that if we don't look at the whole picture, it's not going to be enough to try to deal with one thing. So getting a person into a house is not solving that person's problem.
No.
And then you say, well, they turned the house into a terrible situation, which is, well, we had never given them the house. The reality is there were more issues than just the homelessness that was part of this. And so a couple of the boards I'm on, because of the Gathering Place connection, I have been reinforcing this, that there's a complexity of issues here. So last week I was at a panel led by the community services sector talking about poverty. And the first two sessions were very well presented on poverty. But when I spoke, I said, now, poverty is never alone. And then the next speakers picked up on that and said, you're right, because in the work we're doing, we're noticing this or that. So it's a different lens through which you look. And once you put older people into that complexity as another vulnerability, you have to see, because there's lots of older people who have tons of money, but are vulnerable in other areas. There are lots of older people who don't have very much money, but are very well set up in dealing with, very well supported in dealing with life. And for pastoral ministers, people touching those in the pastoral presence with people, you have to think through that and see through that. Never let one lens be the determining lens.
Thanks so much.
Anyone online have a question or comment?
Okay, do we need a 2-minute break, Rick?
If we can keep it to 2 minutes, it would be great.
2 minutes
Stand
break.
and stretch and what have you. Of course, people can come and go on their own. Those who are online are doing that anyway, I suspect. But we'll restart after.
So we'll just be 2 minutes for the people online.
Yeah.
So you can get your bathroom break too.
Uh-huh.
And Father Kelly, can I ask you when we come back if you would lead us in prayer?
Okay, take a moment, folks. Excellent stuff. We should have booked her for a week, not just a session. Yeah.
It's too much to talk about, too much to talk
Oh, but it's awesome, and putting the context there. I'm looking forward to the second part. But I was naive enough to think, well, we talk just about the spirituality, but how naive. Well, how naive I am.
So one lesson I learned, when I started to give talks first, I knew I didn't know anything. I knew enough to know that. When I got into healthcare, I was brand new and there were people there forever. But the one thing I realized in healthcare is they never saw context. It was always a response to the patient in the bed at this point in time. And on the very first talks I gave, I began to say, let's put this in a context. And then I realized I thought people saw that better than, it even more impressed me if I need to do it. So now I always contextualize. Many times I said, what can I bring to a group? What could I bring to this group of pastoral presence? I don't know anything about pastoral presence, but I do know about context.
Yeah.
So it's the only gift I have.
You go to see the doctor, or you go to see something for help now. They're always addressing a problem. They never address
Not a person.
Oh, yeah.
you never get a chance to share your story.
Yeah.
You always get
No,
to
you
deal
haven't
with it,
got
get
time.
out, get going. I suppose it's part of the rush. But the other thing is that I find that, when I'm talking about aging, I kind of sometimes pinch myself and say, well, now you're in that, you're in that group.
Oh, yeah.
It's true. 15
Yeah.
years.
15 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and when I say the elderly, I myself say, I don't mean me, I can assure you.
No.
Yeah.
Did you want to donate
I'm
anything?
going to have my juice here like the youngsters.
Oh, yeah.
My juice pack.
Oh, they're great.
Well, I tell you, when you travel, you know the difference between age-friendly cities
Oh, yeah.
and cities that are not.
And airlines too.
And
And
airlines.
airports and everything.
I was thinking, when you said that, I was thinking, this morning, Kevin Breen was on about not Kevin,
Dan.
Dan was on about the garbage collection, you know. You'll have these big things, big containers, I guess, that you're going to have to put out on the sidewalk. That's going to be a problem for me in the wintertime. We live in our house. How am I going to get that out through the snow to the sidewalk in the wintertime? But the garbage was the issue, not the person
kind of
who have to deal with
yeah.
it, you know.
And that's the point I keep trying to make, is the lens you use is how you see something.
Yeah, that's right.
And I've written the premier on behalf of our congregation and said you just can't use a financial lens looking at the budget. You have to look at the lens of vulnerable people.
That's right.
They don't pay any attention.
No.
I don't know which lens they are using.
But they shouldn't have paid attention to the aged group, because there are always things with votes, and we're going to have some
Just close. Yeah.
voting stuff, you know. That's the
And that's one of the books I read. I'm not so fond of the Americans these days, but there was a book by Theodore Roosevelt, who's an American sociologist, and he says the power we have, and I have a couple of quotes from his book here, the power we have as an older group now is pretty significant if we use it wisely.
I'm reading a book now, Being Mortal. It's written by a Hindu doctor in Cambridge.
I know it, yes. Somebody gave it to me as a gift.
But it's very interesting because for my study of Hinduism, and from Chinese too, there's always such a veneration for age and wisdom but you know, we kind of tended to isolate ageism and done things to old people that we shouldn't do. So it's only the first stages of
Yes, it's very interesting.
I read that one by Harari that you know, but this artificial intelligence, because that worries me. What's going to happen? You know,
Computer is way smarter than me now, so when they link up, we won't have a whole.
Anyway, so we don't like it. Just get ossified when we get old.
We certainly don't. Although sometimes you'd like to.
Then you'd be an old drunk.
Pardon?
Then you'd be an old drunk.
I remember I lived with a sister who was on a marriage tribunal, you know, looking at annulments. And this was when I studied in Toronto, and she was from Australia. So she came to me one day, she said, Elizabeth, I have an applicant from Newfoundland, but I need to ask you, there's a phrase everybody talking about this person uses, and I need to know what it means, because I think I don't know what it means. They all tell me he drinks a drop. And she said, I was assuming that wasn't too serious. Is that what that means? I said, no, Jan, that means he's a raging alcoholic. She said, are you sure about that? I said, I am positive about that. Because I was, many times, it's a descriptor used. She said, oh, that makes sense of everything. Because I was thinking, this man drinks a drink every day, one drink. So what's this such an issue, a drop? That's all it is. So she said it changed her whole understanding of the case.
Great. We'll have Father Kellett, our chaplain, lead us in a prayer to move into the second.
This is an adaptation of a prayer written by a person well on the way of their Earth's journey, which I believe is absolutely fundamental to everything we've been talking about and learning today, because we can make it our prayer just as much as the person made it his or her prayer. O Lord my God, You have been my strength and stay throughout my life. You alone are righteous and good, gracious and long-suffering towards us. Keep me, Lord, under the protection of your love, and listen to my cry. For you alone are my strength and stay. You alone have the words of eternal life. O Lord, in you alone I put my hope, and I will praise you more and more with each passing day. I will tell of your goodness and grace to all whom I meet and know, so that generations to come, and in those generations your name will be lifted up. And may the voices sing to the praise of your glory and the glory of your name. My life is in your hands, and the joy of the Lord has been my strength throughout every day of my life. My hope is in the Lord my God. Praise your glorious name forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Father Neil. So we move now with that link between the reality, which we could talk about, as Rick said, for a week or a month, talk about that reality. But two things I want you to remember from what I said. One is that this is a new phenomenon. We do not have a life experience of having dealt with large group of older people before. And that phenomenon has to do with generations, at least 2 generations, that have very different values than the other 4 generations living right now among us. And the second thing I would beg you is that you take more and more time to explore that reality. Not for yourselves in how you are a minister, but also for the other in how you're ministering to that person. Now I'm coming into something I know a lot less about than any person around this table or on this conference call. So I'm very clear about that pastoral presence is not my strength, and it's not my gift, and it's not my experience. So now your gifts, your strengths, and your experiences have to compensate. I'm just going to call it forth from you, if you will. I do, though, want to make one note. The oldest one among us, and this is another phenomenon of our time, that we're aware of Mother Earth, that we're aware that in our humanness, we're part of a much bigger reality than humanity. We're part of all God's creation. And while for so long we could stand apart from that and say we are humans and that's nature, what we're learning today, and it's a slow learning, and it's like this sense of older generations, we think we know it, but when we think about it, we realize how little we know, is that all of God's creation is equal. We as humans are no better or no worse. We're different, but we're not unlike. And that we need to, even when we talk about aging and we talk about spirituality of aging, embedded in that spirituality has to be that new learning. We're getting much better resources to help us with it. Each of our traditions has spoken to it now in very strong documents, but we're still at a very primitive stage of understanding and learning in this. And it's very threatening to us in some ways. We were talking in the break about artificial intelligence. You know, we know computers are way smarter than us right now. I'm amazed that I can put something into the computer and get 200,000 places where I can look at something. But we still see ourselves as the master of all we survey. So I just challenge your thinking. Whatever we do in spirituality today, we do it in the context of being part of the sacred community of creation. That's the gift of the time that we are happening to live in. That we are privileged to be part of this sacred community of all creation at a time when we're aware that we are. It's always been so, but our awareness is shifting on that, a gift of our time to us. So now let's look at that pastoral response when we are older, pastorally responding, or we're pastorally responding to someone who is older. And if that sense of the sacred communion of all creation was one of the gifts of the time we're living in, the second gift of the time we're living in is that it's no longer one religion that has the answers. That's been very hard for us in the Roman Catholic tradition to get our heads around, because for many years we said we're the one true church, said it with all kinds of conviction and assurance that it was true. So for us to even acknowledge other Christian churches is a stretch. But now we're realizing that God meant there to be many religions. And I used to pray that we all become one. I still pray it, but I no longer mean it all become one religion. That'd be a terrible travesty of what God intended. I can't think like a Hindu because I did not grow up in Hinduism, but I have been so enriched by being with Hindus and how they see what I call resurrection. They see it a very different way in terms of reincarnation, but is equally rich. And this whole sense of sacred communion of all creation, they've taught me so much about that, even with in the simplest ways, that greeting, namaste, the divine in me recognizes the divine in you, means something very different for me today than it did even 40 years ago. So that whole sense that we're many religions, and that's gift, and that we're privileged to live in a time when we can relate to, speak with people from other religions. Even in this city, we sponsored a Syrian family to come to St. John's. And my question is, what religion are they? And the federal Canadian government people thought I was saying they have to be Christians. And they said, we can't tell you that, sister. I said, well, how am I going to get them to their place of worship when they come here? They said, oh, that's what you meant. We thought you meant you'd only take a Christian or even a Catholic. I said, no, I'm assuming that if they're Syrian, they're probably going to be Muslims, and therefore I have to make sure the mosque knows they're here, and we have a way to get them to the mosque, because the mosque is not in the center of the city. Oh, we still can't tell you. But when they came, we found out they were Muslims, and because I had Muslim connections in the community, we got them connected so they can go to the mosque on Fridays. But it's a very different time. Even growing up in Fox Harbor, there was one Protestant in Fox Harbor, one Protestant, who was married to a Catholic and had 13 Catholic children. So he was kind of outnumbered even in his own house. So for me to be talking to Hindus and Buddhists, it's a bit of a stretch from my experience. But it's so rich, it's so wonderful a stretch, so wonderful a stretch. So that's the second thing we have going for us in this. Now this is true as if we're pastorally present to children or middle-aged people, not just older people. So sacred communion of all creation, many religions. And I love this definition of spirituality that comes to us from the third world theologians who are based in Africa. And it came in 1992. And I've used it ever since the first time I heard it. Spirituality is the name we give to that which provides us with the strength to go on, for it is the assurance that God is in the struggle. Spirituality spells out our connectedness to God, to our human roots, to the rest of nature, to one another, and to ourselves. I just love that. It's the name we give to that which provides us with the strength to go on, for this the assurance that God is in the struggle. Now, if that was ever important to you, wouldn't it be important to you when you are older? When you no longer have the surety you have. Maybe you've lost your license, you can't drive anymore. Your financial security is not as good as it was because your investments have been affected by the volatility in the market. The lack of security you feel, the losses you've endured. When else would you want to have an assurance that God is with you in that struggle? Not fixing things. God is with you in the struggle. And I find it fascinating it comes from Africa, where I suspect there was lots of experience of insecurity that we wouldn't have even here. We have wonderful models in the scriptures, and we could look at Job or Methuselah. In the Old Testament, as we know, old age was considered a special reward because it was so rare. It was only given to some special people who had done over and above what God asked them to. But we have, I love this fact, that right in the Gospels, right away, the two of the most special people we meet are old people, Anna and Simeon. And they get it. We don't know if the shepherds ever got it. We do know they were amazed when they got there. And we don't know if the wise ones ever got it. They were amazed when we got there. But both Anna and Simeon tell us they got it. The first voices we hear of that salvation has come from those two old people. And it's great they were in this temple. You know, it's pretty good that they, even the holy place they chose to be in their older years, was their choice. And we're told clearly it was their choice. And notice in that story how unashamed or unabashed they were to proclaim it. There was nothing insecure or uncertain about them. We're told Anna was a prophet and Simeon is a priest or functions in that role. And I like this particular image because you get the baby, the younger parents, and the older people. But and you know the scriptures way better than I, but it is a rarity that a person is older in the scriptures because it was a rarity that people were older. When Jesus died on the cross at the age of 33, he was pretty much close to the age span of that time. 40 years would have been the most remarkable age you could possibly live to in a normal life in his time. So that imaging of how we see Anna and Simeon, and I've been in churches with priests. I can't give a homily in church because I'm not a man, but I've been in church where priests have come to this homily. This is the reading, and they never mention that the people are old. They never give the gift to the people, the majority of whom sitting in front of them are older. They never give them the gift of saying, these are your crowd. There's that. But God sometimes has to hit us over the head with it. So we not only get the imaging of Anna and Simeon, but we get this delightful passage. I'm an Old Testament person. I have little time for the New Testament. But even I know that if something is important enough to be fully in the Old Testament and fully in the New Testament, God is really saying, you just got to hear me. Like, please listen. So from Joel first, and then Peter, who uses it in the homily, his homily says, God is speaking. I will pour out my spirit on everyone. Your sons and daughters will proclaim my message. Your young ones will see visions, and your old ones will have dreams. Yes, even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days. It's an amazing reminder to us, even in the time back to Joel, or even into time of the New Testament. There was an awareness that God had to remind us that women and men matter, servants and people who are masters matter, young and old matter. So even then, even when there weren't the numbers of older people proportionately that there are today, the scriptures remind us, and because it's said twice in each testament, is a real strong message. Listen to this. You've got to get this. You know from your own study in scripture that Hebrew parallelism is one of the gifts of the writings of the Old Testament, and the parallelism nuances it. Gets us the main message and then nuances it. And this is the nuancing here. Your young ones will see visions and your old ones will have dreams. And because in Joel, whatever about by the time of Jesus, there was no sense of life after death the way we have it. So dreams there is talking about your present reality, not any future possibility. So again, reminding us. In the Old Testament itself, we have that beautiful passage, the righteous flourish like the palm tree and grow like a cedar in Lebanon. They are planted in the house of the Lord. They flourish in the courts of our God. In old age, they still produce fruit. They are always green and full of sap, showing that the Lord is upright. God is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness in the Lord. This is an interesting passage to just do an exegetical look at if we had the time, but how this is imaging old age in the context of nature, in the context of who God is, in the context of we're planted in the house of the Lord. That's a wonderful, wonderful image, that planting image. It's the reverse image of God being planted among us, the dwelling of God among us. But I love the way old age, they still produce fruit, always green and full of sap. Now name the old people, the few that they did have, weren't as energetic as when they were younger, weren't as full of energy as they were when they were younger. So what is the new fruit they're producing? Even that sister with extreme dementia gives me, every time I speak to her, that fruit of being in the present moment. Very different from the fruit I give her of worrying about her care down the road. So we're each giving gift, but the gift is very different. Gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained in a righteous life. Now, in the Old Testament, they would have believed that you survived. That's a gift from God for the good you've done. We see it differently today. But that, you know how much money I'd like to have? The amount of money spent on hair dye in Canada in 1 hour. If I had that, I'd be able to take care of the sustainability of the gathering place far into the future. But gray hair is a crown of glory. Look and see our disgrace. No respect is shown to the elders. Even in the time when Lamentations was written, that if you did not respect elders, that was a sign of your disgrace. And we're talking, this is not even personal. As you know, in the Old Testament, it's almost all communal. We don't get the personal stuff till much later. But that their society, their community did not respect the elders, that was the reason, one of the reasons God punished them with the exile. That's what, as you know, Lamentations is saying here. So our society, not the personal thing too, but for us, our society has not created a society that allows that respect to be shown. And part of it, as you know, is denial. We don't want to be old. So we do everything we can to create a youthful society. The hair dye is a symbol of that. But other things we do to keep ourselves young, you know, seeking the fountain of youth has been a medieval European image that has embedded itself more than any other image in our consciousness, if we could find the fountain of youth. And from Proverbs, a capable woman who can find. She's far more precious than jewels. She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. Give her a share in the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the city gates. Yesterday being International Women's Day, I wanted to show that. I'm sure some of you will have followed the work of Charles Taylor. I know he actually, your Bishop Peddle was his student, he told me. But Charles Taylor, whom I can't read very well because he's a philosopher and is a little bit too difficult for me. But one thing I've learned from him, which I've found very, very, very helpful, is he talks about disjunctions. Now, he's talking about it first and foremost in a Roman Catholic context. That's his culture, but is applicable right across all our traditions. He says people generally are seekers or dwellers. And he says in the faithful, meaning people who maintain connection with their faith tradition, you're always going to find seekers and dwellers. Seekers are people who are constantly trying to find a new way of being a Christian, whereas dwellers feel they already have that. The church is very clear about what we should be about. Seekers believe that we have to be conscious of the times in which we live in search of how our faith tradition works in this time. Whereas dwellers feel the church tells the truth, we follow that. Those who are seekers have to understand that the practice of ethics is as human and fallible as humans are, and it's changing over time. Whereas dwellers believe there's an absolute truth that we have to follow. Seekers believe that by reaching out to other faith traditions, you don't become them, but it helps you enrich your own tradition. Dwellers say, no, we have the complete truth here. And in our tradition, and I think very much in the Anglican tradition, that truth is primarily the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ. Why this matters to you is that you'll have seekers and dwellers at 85 years of age, the same as when they were 45 years of age or 25 years of age. There are women in our congregation who say the church is the one true church, and Elizabeth, you should not be meeting with groups that have Hindus and Buddhists in them. A sister my age, and I'm 68, a very intelligent woman, is very upset with me because when we had our Syrian family in over Christmas for a little social to welcome them, I did a blessing for them. And in the blessing, I said, may Allah be with you all the days you are here with us. She has spoken to me very strongly about how I have used a name for God that's not an inspired name for God, and that I should not be doing it, that I should know better, and I shouldn't be misleading other people. And she was very serious about how flawed that behavior was on my part. And she noticed it before, that I had done it another time, even before these Hindu people came, the Syrians came with us. But I really can't ever do it again. She's very sincere about that. And I said, but the Quran is also the inspired word. Well, that went over really well, really well in the conversation. So she would be, in that instance, she's definitely a dweller. And in that instance, I was definitely a seeker. Now, I have to tell you, on this spectrum, I often wander towards the middle. I'll tend towards the seeker side. But there are times, and I have to tell you one of those times. I was living in Toronto. One of my friends called me and said, my mother has just died. She's Presbyterian. We don't go to church, the children. Will you do the service for us? And I said, no, I won't, because I've never done a funeral service. Sisters don't do that in the Roman Catholic tradition. She said, Elizabeth, don't be so foolish. Will you do the service for us? Because we want a holy service, but we don't know any clergy people. So I said, I'll do it. And I thought, I'll find some pastoral care people to help me. And they were all gone on holidays and stuff. I had to go. So you know what I did? I went and found a funeral rite for a Catholic church. I said, none of them are going to know the difference. And I don't want the poor woman to end up in hell because I fooled up the service. Now, I'm an intelligent person. And the funniest part of it is I did it all out, and I made it very clearly, the Catholic rite, and I went to the church, to the funeral home, and it was a very upscale funeral home. They had tons of money. and all the funeral people had their uniforms on, a very lovely teal and maroon uniform. So I went in and I led the service, and they all thought it was wonderful. None of them ever darkened the door of the church, so they wouldn't know, but they thought it was wonderful. So then I left after the service, and I was sitting out by the parking lot waiting for a taxi to come. And one of the staff came out and came over to me. He said, "You're a sister, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "You just did that service, didn't you?" I said, "Yes." And the two of us burst out laughing. And I said, "You're a Catholic, aren't you?" And he said, "Yes, and you're not supposed to do that stuff." But he said, "It just sounded just like the way the priest buried my mother last month." I said, "Good, I got it right." In that moment, I was a dweller. In that moment, I crossed that line, and I had to follow something I knew would get her into heaven, plus rather than make her end up in purgatory or in hell. And I laugh at myself since, but I do the same thing again. I'm not quite sure I belong on that seeker side. But and this is not related to age. Like this woman who was so upset with me would never call herself an elderly person, but she would have done it that way when she was 30 years of age. And she will do it when she's 90. So you have to know where you are, and it doesn't matter where you are, because for you to be pastorally present, you have to know where the other person is. So it's not your time in your pastoral presence to convince them they're wrong because they're dwellers or they're seekers. Do you know what I mean? It's the reaching out where the other person is that's your pastoral response. So I'm just going to give you some quotes now from a number of sources about this older person. And Rick says these slides are available to you if you want them. Yeah. Just because, as I said, you know way more about this than I do. So I want you to be in your hearts and in your spirits, in your minds, hearing what I'm saying. Pastoral presence, presence and being, a welcoming, calm presence that has the character of at-homeness with oneself, with others, and with God. In spite of illness, in spite even of the arch enemy's sorrow, one can remain alive long past the usual state of disintegration if one is unafraid of change, insatiable in intellectual curiosity, interested in big things, and happy in a small way. Of all the people unheard from in our society, it is still the older woman whose voice is missing most. The spiritual insight of women, that other faith perspective on the world, is missing, and we are all the poorer for it.
Joan Chichester, I like her.
Yes,
writing.
She does some good work on older people. She's a sister, Benedictine sister. Aging is not lost youth, but a new stage of opportunity and strength. It always saddens me how we see children as pre-adults and older people as post-adults. And this is Theodore Roszak, the American sociologist, whose book is called America the Wise. And he says, we are the first generation of senior dominance with more political influence, greater wealth, and more vitality than any older generation before us. The values we choose to live by cannot help but be a commanding influence in shaping the century to come. Gifted with the wits, the political savvy, and the sheer weight of numbers to become a major force for change. If you remember Erickson's work, he had only 8 stages of development in his classic work, his seminal work, and then he himself learned there was a 9th stage. The ninth stage of development is one in which wisdom plays a crucial role. An old age in which one has enough conviction in one's own completeness to ward off the despair that gradual physical integration can too easily bring. The ninth stage of development is one in which wisdom plays a crucial role. An old age in which one has enough conviction in one's own completeness to ward off the despair that gradual physical disintegration can easily bring. And again, back to Joan Chittister. Age became our enemy. Rather than the reservoir of our life lessons, the harvest of faith gathered by some for the good of the many. There is no old age. There is, as there always was, just you. And again from Rosak, years are a cultural and spiritual resource reclaimed from death in the same way the Dutch reclaimed fertile land from the waste of the sea, a chance to join with others in building a compassionate society where people can think great deep thoughts, create beauty, study nature, teach the young, worship what they hold sacred, and care for one another, the chance to do great good against great odds. Years are a cultural and spiritual resource reclaimed from death. And finally, don't complain about growing old. Many, many people do not have that privilege. So what I want you to do now is just for one moment, look in your own life story. Find an older person who has been or probably still is a wisdom figure in your own life. A person who made you stop and think, comforted you, challenged you, called you to be the best you can be. Just think of the older people who've helped you change your life. So any questions or comments on this part of the presentation?
I have one or two notes here. I think that quote from Joel and from Peter about it should come to pass, and I think there's a real contrast between young men, they're young people, I would say. I think Peter would say that.
Yes, I say young ones.
In the present context.
Yes.
The young people see visions, but the older people, it's dreams. And I think that somehow or other that he's thinking in terms of, there's a difference between a dream that you have and a vision that possesses you, and there's some relation to it. So I think that bears some thinking about. I was also thinking,
I like that. Because that's what it does, doesn't it?
Yes.
It challenges you. This is what challenges you on this quote.
Yes.
It makes you think. It's an anomaly.
That's right.
Like, what is he getting at here? And that causes you to find all kinds of possibilities. That's the energy of that particular verse that I find fascinating.
And I would agree. The other thing that I think of, I'm thinking of Dr. Ashley now in
Latin.
And I'm thinking about Cicero's oration on De Senectute concerning old age. And I've forgotten most about it now except the wisdom part of it. But and I wouldn't be able to translate it from the Latin. but I remember, that in every generation, there's been, the Old Testament is full of it, and so is the New too, that there is that respect. People, there are these prophets, what we're going to call them, that pick up this theme of respect for old age.
Yes.
And I think Cicero did that,
And actually, I used to have a quote from Cicero. I must put that back in my presentation.
But Mr. Ashley would.
Dr. Ashley,
Dr.
excuse
Ashley.
me.
But he was Mr. Ashley when we
By my time, he was Dr.
yeah,
Ashley.
when Mrs. Cochran and Mr. Ashley. But I can hear him now taking us through Cicero's orations and De Amicitia concerning friendship. That's the two I remember this morning.
Yeah.
And Day at the Day.
Yeah, and they're very good ones connecting, because it's all about relationship, isn't
That's
it?
right.
Yeah.
And I forgot the other point I was going to
Come back
but
to
that's
it, come
okay.
back to it. The older person I remember is my grandfather McGrath. He's, of all the people I ever met in my life, he's the one person who treated the person he was with utmost dignity. If that was a little child like me, it was a developmentally delayed woman next door who used to come in the house and just sit in the kitchen all day. Both of us were treated with the same dignity as when the Archbishop came to the house, or the member of the House of Assembly. I'll never forget I couldn't name it in those days, but when I look back at that he could do, I never met anybody who could do it like him. And I remember as a little child, we used to have the shavings, the wood shavings, sitting on the floor and twirling the shaving around my finger. And he had an old-fashioned couch, with the high back, leaning on that, but with his pipe, smoking his pipe, and saying for me from memory the long narrative poems, how Horatio saved the bridge and the village blacksmith. I might have been 4 or 5 at most. And then when I was a teenager, I used to read science fiction comics. And he used to get the biggest charge out of him. I read your comic last night about the fly man. Sit down and talk to me about that. Meeting me where I was.
Yes.
So it was a great influence on me.
It's a wonderful gift.
Yes, very rare gift.
Rare
gift.
I'm glad when you mentioned the community of all creation, you used the word sacred, the sacred community of all creation.
And sometimes we don't treat it as sacred. I often say we're terrible guests in this house. That's the planet Earth. Terrible guests. You'd never put up with a guest who does to your house what we do to the earth. Shocking.
Sister, when you use the two categories from Charles Taylor, the seekers and the dwellers, I wonder sometimes, is that a challenge for people as they move into to senior years, that they feel less constrained by the duty probably to be dwellers, because that's kind of what we were raised with and expected to conform to it. But somehow or other within the nature, the spirit of the person, there's an instinct to be a bit more of a seeker, because probably some of the dweller aspects haven't proved to be fruitful and joyful, and a kind of an instinct that leads people to be more open to things than they would have been at an earlier age. Their way of praying and what they would see as prayer change. And I throw it to you, but I'd be interested in comments from others as well on that aspect.
That was the other point that I was going to mention. You thank you too, because I find now that older ways of prayer are not as effective in my life as there's much more time a lot less time for words, and much more time for just being or thinking or something. And so, whereas once I knelt down and prayed fervently, I find that much more now I sit down and think, and I don't know if I'm getting lazy or just kind of pass that off as well, but there is a gap between, I guess that's the way to put it, dwellers and seekers, and you become much more of a seeker. I'm becoming much more of a seeker and less than I was, and that sometimes that concerns me.
And that's been part of both our religious traditions. We had some very clear boundaries, and as you get older, sometimes the boundaries don't matter as much as they sometimes did, but sometimes they're so strong, those boundaries, you can't get past them. And what saddens me is when one of our sisters says to me, Elizabeth, I wish I was free inside myself to do this. That they're still held, sadly, and part of what we seek to do in our pastoral ministry is to help sisters get past those boundaries, to be free, to accept that God is present with me in this very richly and very really, And they blossom when they do. I'm just overwhelmed by the beauty of the reflections that they will do, even though they think we have to say all the prayers and get them done, and then we can do this other stuff. And when you kind of gently help them to get past that, some do more easily than others. Some can never get past those boundaries, so you add it on after the fact.
You get kind of a guilty feeling.
Yes, that you do.
Yeah.
And that's sad that the person I said, you can't possibly have prayed, sister, for 70 years and feel, if you never prayed again, you shouldn't feel guilty. But praying differently, certainly you shouldn't be feeling guilty. But they will say to me, I never finished my office today, Elizabeth, I feel so bad about it, So it's how, and that's back to that definition of spirituality.
Yeah.
It's the assurance that God is in the struggle. It's nothing about what I have to do to make myself worthy of this. That's the beauty of it. And that's what I use talking about repentance in Lent, because we're big on that. I hate giving up candy even now. Repentance does not mean what I thought it meant, like sackcloth and ashes. No matter how many times the scriptures, the psalmists and the gospel writers try to tell us that, we don't listen. Now I'm saying, you know what repentance means? It means turn, doesn't it? Turn to believe the good news is really good news. Exactly. And it's good news.
Good news, yes.
Not news, it's good news. And that's when we say repent and believe the good news. What we should be saying, repent and believe the good news is really good news. It's really good news. And that's what we need to turn towards, not turn towards more sackcloth and ashes. And, so some ways like that, I've learned that you could shock people sometimes into dropping those boundaries a little tiny bit, but only a little. You have to be persistent in it, I've learned. Otherwise, they come right back up again. Now back to your question.
Well, with regards to the sister who was upset because you gave the blessing using Allah, you can tell her that Allah in Arabic is literally a contraction for al-ilah, which literally means the God. And in Arabic translations of the Bible, God is called Allah.
I know.
So Arabic Christians call God Allah. and now, with regards to my question, is there then a sort of technique of meditation which tries to go beyond words so that you can move beyond the sort of dwelling into a more depth of seeking?
Yeah, it's not so much a technique, Michelle, but what we are becoming more conscious of is contemplation, contemplative stance, contemplative listening, and contemplative seeing. And, it's funny for nuns to be saying that. You would have thought we did that all our lives, but we haven't done it all our lives. And we're spending a lot of time and study on trying to hear together what this is. So much so, when I would be a young sister, I would have thought of contemplation as personal. It's between me and God. We have moved to contemplation being communal, where we do it in our communities, small or bigger, little groups, bigger groups. And now we're talking about global contemplation. This past year, Sisters of Mercy around the world set up a process of working in small groups in 44 countries, because we're in 44 countries, reflecting together on the same issue over the whole year of mercy. And actually, your Bishop Peddle was in my small group with a Hindu and a Buddha, and a Hindu and a Muslim and Jewish woman, because I wanted my group to be a little bit broader than the others. But we're starting to learn what that means, what contemplation means in a world that is so busy, our world right now. And so that's where we're starting to turn our thought and our attention to, Michelle. And in that contemplation, I use, and some of you probably have done this, but I use the story of the Good Samaritan. I never fail to be amazed at myself about how little I know and how I can look at something for years and years and years and not see something there in Scripture. But I've begun to see the story of the Good Samaritan as a wonderful metaphor. It starts off with contemplative seeing. And when you look at the actual text exegetically, the priest saw, the Levite saw, and the Good Samaritan saw. All saw the same thing, you would think. But whatever the Samaritan saw caused his heart, and the Scripture says, to be filled with compassion. So his was contemplative seeing. The other two just saw with their physical eyes. And I use that as a way for us to deepen what we mean by contemplative seeing. So it's no longer just thinking with my mind and praying, but it's somehow my whole being is part of that moment of seeing. And that's mine and it's ours, because in the story of the Good Samaritan, the I becomes we pretty quickly. First he holds the man. We're told he tended him, he touched him, he put oil on him, and so he physically touched the man. But then what did he do? He brought him to somebody else, that innkeeper. He didn't stay to take care of him. He went about his business, but he brought that innkeeper into that contemplative moment. Paid him, but he still brought him in. And then Jesus takes the story even further. When the story is over, he says to the man who questioned him, who is the neighbor, and he said, I suppose the one who tended him, he couldn't bring himself to say Samaritan, and he says, you go do the same. So from that contemplative moment that was mine, became ours to include the innkeeper, and then became ours to include every person whose life I touches, and that comes back then to another contemplative moment. So that's the way, if you look at it from the outside, we've been trying to think through who we are as Sisters of Mercy in this time, or as Catholics in this time, or as people in very broad ministries at the Gathering Place or St. Patrick's Mercy Home. So that's the way we're going with it, Michelle, in terms of a conscious and intentional way to deepen our whole sense of what it means to be part of that sacred communion of all creation. And I don't know if that answers your question, but for us, it's very much tied to what we now use the term mercying, which we stole from Pope Francis, and he made it up. But it's a way of being, when we're older women, like when we were young, we were all active. We were in the hospital, we were in the schools, we were busy, 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 busy. And it's very easy for us to say, like, all that's gone now. We just got to take care of ourselves till we die. But I'm saying there's no way. We got too much left to give to be saying that kind of stuff. So whether our sister has dementia or is very active is irrelevant. We're part of this contemplative circle of mercy that keeps deepening itself consciously and intentionally. And more is being written about that. So we're finding more and more material to help us reflect together. And the fact some of our sisters are in Peru have a very different lived reality than we have in St. John's is helping us. And we have sisters in 44 countries that we can link with. That's helping us make some sense of all of that. I know that's not what you expected me to say, but it was an important question for us.
Thinking in the direction of contemplation.
Yeah, because we're an older group of women, and we know we don't have the physical energy we had when we were younger, but we still have much that to be women of mercy, but a totally different way of being, different way of praying, different way of seeing, different way of acting. Now, Rick, I'm sorry, you told me to stop at 11:30.
Oh, no, this was, I wouldn't dare stop you because it was so informative and helpful. And I just want to, well, I'm going to ask, we're fortunate today, and for those who aren't online, Archbishop Percy Coffin is with us. He's the Chancellor of Queen's College, of course, Bishop of the Diocese of Western Newfoundland and Archbishop of the Province of Canada in the Anglican Church of Canada. It's great having you with us. You were with us yesterday. We kept them busy, and we didn't stage all this to impress you, but we hope you're part of us, and so good to have you with us. But I'll ask you, Your Grace, to say a word.
Before you ask Percy to be, I want to tell you Percy is a close friend of our family, and has been a gift in our family. So I was doubly blessed to be here.
You used the word terrorist earlier this morning in reference to Donald Trump, which doesn't warm anybody, couples of anybody's heart, I think. But for the first half of this session, you were the terrorist, because I'm 64, I've announced my retirement. And I said, is this what I'm looking at? There's got to be more than this. But being the saint, you are also the saint from Placentia Bay. You brought me around full circle in the second half. And I think I've been immersed in a company here that assures me that there's lots of good years left. And one other quote would be from Lord Tennyson. Well, old age has yet
Yes,
I cannot rest from travel. I'll drink life to the least. So there's a great hope in it as well. So we need to be put on that, because we're aware of the damage that's being done to people of this particular age group. And get smarter. You've done that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Blessing from the Iona community, the earthy people, the people of creation. The peace of God, the peace of God's people, the peace of Mary, mild, the loving one, the peace of Christ, King of human hearts, God's own peace, be upon each thing our eyes take in, be upon each thing our ears take in, be upon our bodies which come from earth, be upon our souls which come from heaven. The blessing of God Almighty, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be among you and remain with you always. Amen.
Amen. And thank you so much, Sister Elizabeth. It's been a thrilling day. We will have the slides available. Just send me an email and I'll send them to you. And also the recorded session, which are the slides that we saw, and the narrative, Sister's comments and other comments and questions will all be available online within a couple of days. So you can share it with others and advise others, and we'll put the link of it on our website and in our newsletter next production. So thank you to those who are here and to those who are online. Blessings on all of you. Great. Thank you, most especially, again, Sister Elizabeth. Folks, we're going to have a bit of, we'll have a midday prayer shortly, and then we'll move into the common room to have a light lunch. And so we certainly ask and encourage you to stay with us. Time.
I don't know what I'm doing.
Yes, but he figures he'll be back by 12:15 or so. Fine.
Yeah.